put pregnant rats to create a population, and as the population started increasing, he created a utopia.
I do believe that, it's an interesting scenario with the rats, that, a lot of that comes back to human behavior and, how we see ourselves.
We uploaded a short, which I find very connected to this, by the CEO of NVIDIA, right? The title is "Pain Builds Greatness."
I think what it ended up doing is it proved, no, when you have overabundance and you lose purpose, look what happens. I'm telling you, search within, find your purpose, because when the parents don't have purpose, they can't give some to the kids. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Stars in Our Sky. Get to share the stage today with some real stars, Riaan Du Plooy and Gaby Sedra. And I'm your co-host, Malak Sedra. How are you? Now, every now and then, science goes with a purpose in mind to experiment with something, and they come up with something else at the end. Bunch of cardiologists were trying to figure out a medication for heart disease, but they realized adverse effects, gave them Viagra. On the other hand, this has been a trend in science forever. That's how we figured out how genomes work, how mRNA works. Most of very interesting research starts with a hypothesis, which is the scientific methodology, but then sometimes we come up with very interesting outcomes. Today, we want to bring to you what is a science experiment that everybody thought was going to give a certain output at the end, but the output is completely different. If you've studied psychology in school, the odds are this was one of the topics you had to take. It's an experiment in the early 1900s. Let me put a small video on to tell you what this is about, and then let's discuss it with each other. This will blow your mind.
This podcast is sponsored by e-sky, a revolutionary AI-powered state-of-the-art learning management system for small to mid-size enterprises.
Of the strange research to come out of mid-1900s America, there is little with a legacy as enduring or as terrifying as the mouse Utopia experiments. Taking place throughout the 50s, 60s, and early 70s, the grim fate of the subjects was published in the national magazine Scientific American, and the experiments themselves were largely taken as apocalyptic portents. In a post-war United States, the language used to describe the results such as behavior sync became synonymous with fears of an overpopulated world and violent, deviant behavior in cities. Today, they are preserved within fiction such as Channel 4's conspiracy thriller Utopia and the classic animated movie The Secret of NIMH.
Our world began changing.
So what were the mouse Utopia experiments? Shortly after World War II, a group known collectively as the environmentalists were making a large push to prevent environmental degradation, as well as overexploitation of the planet's renewable resources. Among these people were a group specifically known as the Neo-Malthusians, a term referring to the 18th and 19th century English scholar Thomas Robert Malthus. Malthus proposed that while the world's population may increase exponentially, food production can only increase linearly, leading to an eventual subsistence-level existence for the human race that became known as a Malthusian catastrophe. While advancements such as the Green Revolution saw that this didn't come about, the Neo-Malthusians acknowledged his concerns about overpopulation and feared that this pattern would result in the collapse of civilization or, at best, have extreme adverse effects. These fears were given a platform in writing of the time, especially in works such as William Folkt's Road to Survival in 1948, and perhaps most famously, Silent Spring by Rachel Carson in 1962. Before the movement's explosion of popularity in the 50s and 60s, however, researchers had already begun work investigating the effects of population growth, and among them was a man named John B. Calhoun. Born in 1917, Calhoun took an early interest in science, specifically ornithology, publishing his first paper on birds when he was 15, but over time, his interest would change. By the time he received his PhD, his focus had turned to ethology, the study of animal behavior. When his education was concluded, he moved with his family to Towson, Maryland, to begin research at Johns Hopkins University in nearby Baltimore, but the research itself would be conducted much closer to home. In 1947, shortly after he arrived, he approached his neighbor about using some of their neglected property for an experiment. The scope would be massive, and according to Calhoun, his neighbor probably didn't expect such a scale when they agreed to let him use the forested area. Taking over 1/4 of an acre, Calhoun constructed a massive habitat, complete with food, water, ample shelter, and protection from predators, with the only limiting condition being their restriction to the 1/4 acre living space. He affectionately provided his enclosure a name, Rat City. Unfortunately, no publicly available images of Rat City exist. Calhoun was very familiar with Norway rats, having performed research on them for his doctorate, and he estimated that Rat City could sustain approximately 5,000 individuals, though if they reached this number, the population density would be tight. He began by placing 5 pregnant females in the enclosure, providing ample genetic diversity, and soon the population was increasing exponentially. But then something surprising happened. Rather than the population increasing to fill the space of the enclosure, it quickly leveled off at 150 members. He also noted some behavioral peculiarities. Despite the large size of Rat City, the residents seemed to gather around just a few places, forming social groups of 12 and limiting themselves to specific feeding locations. He would conclude the experiment after 2 years and 4 months, during which the population never grew over 200. Careful observation revealed the cause: high infant mortality. For some reason, as the experiment progressed and the population increased, the mothers were not caring for their young properly, leading to most of them dying before reaching maturity. Calhoun had his theories as to why this was, but to prove them, he would need more data.
And he went on, and he did more experiments, and
incredible.
redid this a couple of years later.
This is incredible.
And he did this a couple of years later, and we can discuss the results with each other. But in summary, he created a space where he put pregnant rats to create a population, and as the population started increasing, he created a utopia. Everything they needed, he would clean it on regular basis, provide food, provide water. They needed nothing. They did not need to hunt. They didn't need to run away from cats or eagles. Now, and I know you guys are well researched on the topic because we all did, and our research team went and looked into this. To our audience, let's start discussing what happened at the end, because that could be revealing of what's happening in societies today. And I think it's time that we bring such topics back to the surface with people like, Bill Gates or other politicians around the world who were talking about world population increase, etc., and we should alter or diminish the growth rate of population.
Mm-hmm.
Let's discuss what this experiment did. So, Gaby, you want to tell us some of the behaviors that ended up happening with time? When you have a pure utopia?
Go Lean It. Go Lean It offers a symphony of efficiency through lean services and solutions, driving scalable and sustainable results. Visit goleanit.com.
I mean, I kind of, in a practical way, I'm trying to think of how I could relate to something like this. And for me, it's like if you went to an all-inclusive vacation, when we go to these resorts, and the first week is incredible, right? Like, and if you've ever stayed a second week, we all know that feeling, right? Where you kind of feel like, oh, all right, like this is maybe, this is dragging a little bit, right? Like, and you kind of feel like, you're laying down and everything is at your fingertips, But I've always wondered, like, what would it be like to live in an all-inclusive, like for forever? And it kind of sounds like that. You start losing that purpose. So, I feel like unlimited resources weakens the human bond. It weakens us as
Maybe we should look at the Epstein files. I don't want to go there, but hey, that's what happens when you have ultimate abundance. You're right. All the guys that ended up on that thing are people that had power and ultimate abundance. At a certain point, there's a certain amount of corruption that happens. Riaan, what did you think of that?
About it, I mean, my whole philosophy around this is, all these famous people, billionaires, whatever. If you look at it, their lifestyles, I mean, at some stage, I've got a couple of friends that's, in that situation. They get bored with life and they start looking at the extreme parts of it for their thrills. Because normal life isn't good anymore, and especially once they exit a business and they get a big payout and they're like, okay, well, now, chilled out. I'm just gonna go in my yacht and I'm just gonna cruise around the world and whatever. They get, I mean, I get phone calls from these guys out of all, places in the world, and they're like, I'm bored. What can I go do? Do you know anyone around? Whatever. Yeah. And I do believe that these people, and that's why these things come up. There's some really sick people out there, but there's also some really bored people out there. And there's this whole hierarchy, that is also in this experiment. Whereas, some people are, we in the rat race, we're running around, carrying on. And then there's the different levels of people and, blue collar, white collar, all the different colors in the world. But I do believe that it's got a lot to do with, like Gaby said, purpose. I mean, if I had to stay at an all-inclusive, resort for longer than probably a week, like you say, mate, by the end of that week, I already feel like a fat slob that needs to go and stop eating and just go on a fast for 72 hours. Because I just feel like I'm running around, I'm just chilling and I've got no purpose in life. I've got nowhere to be, nowhere to do. My friends aren't there, it's like, that's the kind of stuff that I think, we all would love that. But at the end of the day, what do you do then? It's like, what's your purpose after that? You go home, you start working, you find something you're passionate about, you reconnect, with people around you. And I think that's where, these extremes that we're experiencing these days in these special times that we live in, because it really is extraordinary times. And in the fact that it's so widely publicized, there's stuff that, happened, back in the Roman days and whatever that we will never know about. I mean, there's stuff, in my childhood that no one will ever know about because there wasn't any cameras or phones or whatever. But I do believe that, it's an interesting scenario with the rats that, that's a lot of that comes back to human behavior and, how we see ourselves and, a lot of them with, like eating their babies and, all that kind of stuff, just a survival mechanism and the sexual part of it. And I think it's, it's just.
So you are right, because if you look at civilizations, right? If you look at civilizations, and I agree with you, you look at civilizations, whether it was the Romans, the Greeks, at a certain point when they're overabundance, you start seeing the same similarities.
Yeah.
Let's call them perversions, okay? And I'm going to use that term. I'll ask the audience to take that loosely, but there are certain perversions because there's just so much intake, okay?
Yes.
Now,
There's so
now,
much abundance,
exactly. So what's your purpose? I mean, our purpose, for those of, like us who are struggling, you go in the morning, we were just talking about that, you have bills to pay, you have this. There is something driving you.
Yeah.
To the point I even was saying it made me be more pensive about, for example, the Coptic Orthodox Church and its strength. Part of it was in persecution for a couple of thousand years. So you're in a preservance style mode. Now, He made the experiment a few times.
Just the fact that a couple of thousand years, you know how long that is. I mean, and you know how short that is in the biggest scheme of things. I mean, if you look at, the timeline of Earth and whatever, all the stuff that we get told, you think about 2,000 years, let's say, of persecution, and people don't understand these days what persecution means. It's literally laying down your life for what you believe in. I don't know how many people are out there these days that are willing to do that. But being persecuted for that long, 2,000 years, how many generations is that? That's like 40 generations of people at least, or 60 in the area. And, to talk about that stuff, it's like, okay, well, we were persecuted now, now we're starting to get the stuff and whatever. It's like, that to me is like the timeline that we, are in humanity. And then you look at like you say, the Greeks, the Romans, all that kind of stuff, how long they were in power or whatever in Europe. And
Western civilizations now.
And it's like, our lifetime is a speck on a timeline of humanities. But we always want.
So
yeah.
Exactly. And to mention that, we just had the 21 martyrs in Libya.
21 Coptic martyrs, yeah.
The 21 Coptic martyrs, they were beheaded in public.
This is their month. I mean, this is the month of remembrance.
The month of the 21. They were beheaded in public because they refused to deny their faith in the face of, we'll call them bullies. And that experiment talks about that.
Yeah.
So he made the experiment a few times, and I'm going to show a small short clip about one of the last times he's made it, just so we can give our audience some perspective. And we'll put a link to this video, by the way, in the comments and in the section below. The second time he made the experiment, he made quarters, and the weaker mice would go to the middle. The stronger mice almost stay on the outside. They would bully the smaller mice. The smaller mice started hanging out with the females, not mating with them. And later, they would start to go and try to make advances to the stronger mice. And then there were some sort of out of the norm for mice behaviors. Okay? And let's keep it at that, so we don't delve into an area and lose that topic.
That's not good.
Now let's go see the third time where he had to go do it. We'll just watch a couple of minutes and then we'll get some conclusions. Okay? So I'm going to share again.
Perfect his enclosures and experiments until finally, after 11 years, Calhoun revealed his magnum opus through an article he entitled Death Squared, which was published in the journal Proceedings of the Royal Society of Medicine in January of 1973. The lengthy opening to this article was undeniably apocalyptic. Calhoun wrote, "I shall largely speak of mice, but my thoughts are on man, on healing, on life and its evolution. Threatening life and evolution are the two deaths, death of the spirit and death of the body. Evolution, in terms of ancient wisdom, is the acquisition of access to the tree of life." Unquote. He goes on to heavily reference revelations and of the riders of the apocalypse, using them to proclaim that the Hippocratic Oath applies not only to the body, but to the spirit. After this dramatic introduction, he described his test. For the most part, these new experiments were similar to his 1963 trials, including unlimited access to food and water, protection from the elements and predators, and safeguards against disease. Many parts, however, were drastically altered. As Calhoun mentions in his introduction, the Norway rats used in his first publicized experiments were replaced with albino house mice, which were taken from a breeding group from the National Institutes of Health made specifically to prevent communicable disease. To fit his new subjects, Calhoun had designed an entirely new enclosure. This version was much more vertical, with 16 wall-mounted housing areas for the rats at the tops of long metal tubes, which Calhoun called walk-up apartments. At the bottom of each apartment was a virtually unlimited supply of food, water, and nesting material. With the space provided, Calhoun estimated that it could potentially hold 3,840 mice. He named this enclosure Universe 25. Calhoun's methods also had changed. Rather than instituting population controls, he would interfere far less. His plan was to place 8 mice in the enclosure, 4 male and 4 female, and simply watch and wait. Calhoun observed 4 distinct phases in the ensuing experiment. Phase A was predictable, constituting the time period before the first new mice were born, which ended up being 104 days. For the mice, these days were, quote, marked by considerable social turmoil. After the social order was established and the first brood was born, the population began Phase B, which Calhoun named the
Think of the
exploitation
Western world
phase.
and what's going on
During
in the
this
Western
time,
world.
the mice doubled in number every 55 days as new young grew to maturity and had their own young. This doubling continued until day 315, after which the doubling rate slowed to a rate of 145 days, nearly 3 times as long. By this point, the different broods had clumped into one side of the pen, exhibiting the same sort of clumping as the Norway rats, but this time without any coaxing from Calhoun's designs. This change in the rate of procreation marked Phase C, which Calhoun labeled as the stagnation phase. This is when the most notable events occurred, and they eerily mirrored Calhoun's rat experiments. In a natural setting, those mice which find no social niche will leave the colony, but in this experiment, emigration was impossible, and so those forced to remain withdrew from society. These dejected males formed a large pool in the center of the enclosure.
You guys notice the
They
behavioral
quickly
changes?
became characterized by both their inactivity and their many scars and wounds. Occasionally, they would grow agitated and attack one another, and with nowhere to retreat, the recipient of these attacks would simply lay still and endure the assault. The outcast females, rather than joining them, would retreat to the highest apartments and live quietly among one another. It was during this time that the behavioral sink manifested, with mice gathering around specific food hoppers in large numbers, while others remained almost entirely untouched, showing how, again, the need for social interaction had become so intertwined with the need for food that the former had overtaken the latter. The males who had won the initial fights also were placed under extreme stress. As more and more mice reached maturity from within and without, the leaders of the social groups continually had to patrol and defend their territory. Eventually, they reached the point of exhaustion and could not defend the females within their group. These
They've
females
gone
were
woke,
therefore
guys.
forced
That's
to
what
defend
happened.
the nest themselves, even when nursing
Yep.
their young, leading to generalized aggressive behavior. This
Yeah.
aggression would inevitably be misdirected onto their young, who would be wounded by their mothers and forced to leave the nest before they were finished weaning. Much like the rats, the mother mice would also forget some of their young when moving from one nesting site to another. Due to the added stress of defending their territory, sometimes the mothers would reabsorb unborn mice in the womb, further reducing the fertility rates. Calhoun writes, "For all practical purposes, there had been a death of societal organization by the end of Phase C. Finally, there was Phase D, which Calhoun entitled the death phase. This phase was characterized largely by an entire generation of young who had been rejected by their mothers early and forced to leave the nest, and they were therefore unable to exhibit normal social behavior.
They spent
This
the time
manifested in
grooming,
numerous ways.
not making
the
kids.
females of this generation had far fewer
What's the
children,
Western
and those that
reproduction
did
rate?
have children lacked the maternal instincts necessary to raise them beyond weaning." Calhoun goes on to describe the males of this generation. Quote, "Male counterparts to these non-reproducing females were soon dubbed the beautiful ones. They never engaged in sexual approaches toward females, and they never engaged in fighting, and so they had no wound or scar tissue. Thus, their pelage remained in excellent condition. Their behavioral repertoire became largely confined to eating, drinking, sleeping, and grooming, none of which carried any social implications beyond that represented by contiguity of bodies." Unquote. As the last mice with reproductive instincts aged beyond their fertility, Calhoun declared that the last male would die around day 1780 of the experiment, effectively rendering the colony dead as it would be unable to produce any more young. His present tense language implied that, when the article was published, the colony was still technically alive, though its final fate was practically sealed.
Well, that's the danger of ease. You know, it's like the purpose of life. Or
So, yeah, and the conclusion of this is, well, mothers stopped caring for their young. There was a bunch of kids that I was going to say grew up in, single parent homes. They grew up in no homes. They were thrown in the street and created a subculture. They stopped basically acting within the norm of societal thing, We went from organization, where everybody knew what they were doing, to a certain anarchy, and the reproduction rate dropped. Can you make similarities with what's happening in an overly abundant, easier way of life in the Western world? And here we are, okay? And there was a group that were just so obsessed with themselves, didn't want to have kids. They were not interested in male counterparts. They were just interested in how they looked, right? How they identified.
And how would you how would we protect our country? For example, like how would you have the army and people willing to go and fight, right? Like how are you going to generate that if you want to have a world where it's so easy and nobody wants to step, and defend? I want the audience of Malak as well. Like we uploaded a short, which I find very connected to this on by the CEO of NVIDIA, right? Where the title is "Pain Builds Greatness." Pain, and what I love about his quote is, "I wish upon you struggle," right?
Pain.
I wish upon you,
Struggle.
like pain and struggle. I want you to have that. If you want to reach greatness, you have to embrace it. And the thing is about this that's scary is it just shows how many people how this experiment depicts how we sometimes wish we would have no suffering, and we run away from it, but the consequence of it is exactly what we're seeing right there. So anyway,
Cancel.org, redefining global consulting, delivering world-class solutions through proven methodology, measurable and sustainable results.
It also reminds me of
crazy experiment.
like what's it? Soft men create hard times, hard times create hard people create soft times, or easy times.
Yeah.
So, it's weird to me also that they use rats. Why don't use pigeons and see what they do? It's like it's. I wonder if it's inherently, there's the data is a little bit skewed too.
So from a brain point of view, from a brain point of view and biological anatomy, we share a lot with rats, believe it or not. And that's why a lot of the medication experiments are done on lab rats, which is what he used for the last experiment.
Rats too, right?
Yes. Okay. And I'm assuming you're not talking about rats.
And I'll say something. That there was a conspiracy during how the COVID started. I don't know if you guys remember that.
Yep.
Right. It was just a conspiracy saying that this world is overpopulated.
And some people wanted
to reduce the number of humans.
Yeah.
Now I don't know how this sounds very crazy and very far-fetched, but
to go away from all of and I agree with you, Gaby. People put ideas out there.
Yeah,
right?
it's just ideas.
And if you go look, there's
no facts necessarily.
You can go look at Bill Gates' TED Talk, where he talks about
that. That was viral.
The stunning of population growth as one of the solutions. Okay, they always say everybody takes out of context. I would say if you have better context, please put something in the comment. If you think what we're saying is wrong, argue with us. I don't mind doing a second and a third one. We're on the search for the truth. But the conclusion, although the whole thing was trying to prove something about overpopulation, I think what it ended up doing is it proved, no, when you have overabundance and you lose purpose, look what happens. So, Gaby, you posted a short. I invite everybody to go look at it and like it and all this stuff, comparing Elon Musk's reality, what I think is a utopia, and Sam Altman's. One thinks with AI, people are going to have no jobs and have nothing. And I think that's a very dangerous place to go.
Very dangerous, mate.
And the other one thinks, no, we're going to be a bit more proactive. I would say if we go to where Elon Musk is going, the end is right there. We just saw it on a video.
Yeah.
The population collapsed. Men were no longer able to reproduce. The last man died. He called the time of death. I think it's at 300 and something, 780 something days, right? So, but what happened? What happened? They congregated out in certain areas. They started acting differently. Society went in a downward spiral.
Yeah.
Collapse. Let us take lessons from that, and to collapse, right?
Definitely. I think, for me, there's, you remember the movie WALL-E, like all of us, have seen WALL-E with our kids. The people just sitting in their lounge chairs with their big gulps and whatever. I think a lot of people on Earth at the moment feel that way, that's how their life should be. But at the end of the day, you've got no backbone. When you get out of that chair, there's no backbone. There's no boundaries. No one's telling you no. You don't have to critical think. And when it comes to AI, it's spawning a whole new generation of jobs and industries and everything around it. So, for me, it's like, I don't think we're ever going to get to that utopia where no one's working and everyone is getting money into their accounts, because of the fact that we are a separated society. We've got first world, second world, third world. We've got the elites. We've got the whatever's on top of them, whatever's below them. I honestly believe that, if you're going to get AI, it's going to be in all of us know AI is in your richer nations. And then you got your third world countries, which are still running around with sticks and stones, herding goats. So, at the end of the day, and we're all utilizing their, resources, and we exploiting them and all that kind of stuff. It's like, personally, I don't think we're ever going to get there, because we are not solidified with our goals. We're not solidified as a people. I mean, we've never been this divided in the history of mankind. So at the end of the day, we should, in my opinion, be able to talk about this stuff. Remember the fact, I always go sticks and stones, remember that saying? Yeah. And get all the emotion out of it. And once people leave the emotion at home, then we can get to the action part and actually fix all this stuff.
As a parent, and all three of us.
Then I'm going to exit left, okay?
Oh, to wrap this up in this minute, we're all three parents on this, and I'll talk to the parents in all of us. Here's what happens if you over provide. If you create a utopia for your kids, it creates spoiled kids. Give them purpose. Give them something to fight for. Provide enough and let them go hustle and bustle, and pray for them that they have struggles.
Yeah.
Because struggles build. Okay? All parents want the best for their kids. I'm telling you, search within, find your purpose. Because when the parents don't have purpose, they can't give some to the kids. Find your purpose. Get your kids to focus on purpose, or your teams, right? If you're running a company, if you have a startup, focus on purpose. Because the conclusion is a societal collapse. Any final words, guys?
No, mate, I agree 100% with you.
I agree 100%.
If anyone's got any comments or whatever, they want us to talk about this even more, just put it in the comment section down below. And let's get the conversation started, guys. Don't be so scared of it. It's like, we talk about all this, like conspiracy theories and everything else, but let's talk about the truth. Let's talk about where we are and what are we going to do about it, yeah?
Awesome. Well, looking forward to you guys in the next episode of Stars in Our Sky, where we'll bring you guests, stars that shine bright in our industries, in the startup world, in established world, in Fortune 500s. You're going to see them all right here, and we're constantly on the quest for the truth. See you guys next time.
See you all, everyone. Take care. Stay safe.